A writer's only job is to characterize things well. I write to you from Landlock. Landlock is the closest thing I have in mind to characterize this experience that unites us. This experience of being alive. Landlocked in ourselves, landlocked in our minds, and landlocked in each other. I write to you from Landlock. The lives we live will lead as unlit ascents from the soils of our birth into the final expression of what the stars had in store for us, punctured by screams of brilliant recognition. And the words we use, we string together out of our initial apprehension of that original and depthless solitude that bonded us together. As a child, I used to wonder all the time if I had woken up that morning in somebody else's country, trapped in somebody else's body, locked in somebody else's memories. Human differentiation seemed back then such a source of endless wonderment to me. Without language, we would only ever be able to see out of our own eyes. In words, we have the sea. Some 2.5 decades ago, my family and I had crossed the sea to land in somebody else's country. Over there is the sea, and out there, the stars are the words that have been emblazoned in my mind ever since I was a child. Landlocked in a childhood that held no context for me, no frame of reference to speak of. I'd learned of its true contours only by way of being engulfed into the culture around me, replicated by nothing. Replicated not in the misfortunes I had read about, or in the victories I had seen on TV, but curious about it all the way all young minds are, sinking into that blanket of words. The lives of other people had a way of swelling over us without ever washing us back into them. We had emerged onto the shores of this country into a curiously tropeless existence. A photograph taken of us back then would have revealed us to be a stubbornly hopeful family, Asiatic in origin, taken in front of the Komodo dragon exhibit at the Birmingham Zoo. The father in a red polo, the mother in a black skirt, and the child taken in by laughter, buoyant, parched for culture and company, afloat inside the world of other people and oblivious to his family's enclosure. Oblivious to our own remoteness, oblivious to our own isolation. So estranged from our surroundings that the other visitors that day at the zoo would in the months and years to come look only like tourists on the continent of our own family photo. There we were, pinned into place by a specificity of non-belonging that was as indefinable as it was total. Our lives subverted our tropes as quickly as we fell into them. In my later attempts to photograph into words that solid block of longing against which every day fell into place, with a renewed and deepened understanding of our place on the outside of things. Words failed me all the time. Cruelty, enclosure, a child and a mother terrorized by a father in their country. They all capture some of it. All come close to that spiraling dust cloud of memories that had by the twilight of my adolescence left me afloat and astray inside the sense that some of these things did not have to go this way, that fathers did not have to beat their families, and terror did not have to be the natural order of things, and suffering built no character at all, but only eroded away at the virtues that might have been, because what doesn't kill you only makes you stranger, only makes you coarser, only makes you retreat back into yourself and become the guardian of your own neuroses, your resolve uncertain, your nerves brittle, and your gaze cast forever upwards. The innocence of childhood is the innocence of a world parceled out to you in pieces, and you learn to love whatever you have because it is in our instinct to love, the inertia of being alive. Only later does that inertia transform into depletion by the disturbance of comparison. And only later do those depletions transform into injuries by the disturbance of longing. Our gaze turned upwards, gentle, throbbing longing, sometimes hopeful and sometimes anguished, pulsing each of us through a lifelong kinetic passage towards some final settlement with ourselves and our fate, towards some final solace. In fact, the disturbances that would arrest me for the rest of my life would have already been oscillating just beneath the placidity of the photograph. In fact, the woman in the photograph would have already apprehended what awaited her in her own passage, would have already come to terms with her terminal exclusion from the understandings of her childhood, and learned to ask for only small things in life. And in fact, the child, so giant and garish in his love for his parents that day at the zoo, would have already embarked upon his first suicide attempt at the age of 7. A memory that at last defies all explanation save for the solidity of that particular longing, save for the solidity of what had already by then become the sole fixed truth of his childhood, that family was a place where violence happens. The memories that come to mind now are of the patterns that formed from the fissures in the concrete stairs outside our apartment as the hours passed waiting for my mother to stop sobbing, are of severed chairs and shattered plates of food thrown into walls and of blood that dripped from the nose to the floor, all waiting for my mother to clean up. Uncoupling himself from the place where violence happens during one of his father's routine explosions outside a Japanese supermarket on a bright spring afternoon, his mother already trembling, the Americans around us already averting their gaze, and hurtling himself into street traffic, and hurling himself into the parking lot and onto the path of an oncoming truck, draping his arms and legs hysterically across the asphalt as if imitating a bird that had at last grown tired of gravity, or else Christ on the cross, his mother on fire, his father livid and victorious and forcibly restraining his wife from hurtling after her son as if to say, "Look what you've done. Look what you've done to this child." And the child, counting down the seconds in his head until what had begun as the theatrical would dissolve into the irrevocable. And the child's first true act of rebellion would also become his last. The gentle murmurs of that bright spring day, not a cloud in the sky save for the voice of his mother, howling and demented and ablaze in her efforts to break free from her husband's grasp, desiccating into gasps of air that some 20 years later would still echo in my memory like the secret of some long-concealed murder, and the voice of my father, lucid and patient and in control of everything, goading me on cheerfully from half a block away. I write to you from Landlock. We all do. We all come into each other's lives from the poverty of our own perspective, from the humility of our own point of view, errant and imperious and triumphant in its claim over our understanding of what it is like to be a human in this world, entombed as we are inside the soul that these experiences created, and landlocked as we are inside of memories that can only ever reach each other as language, but that will resound forever in our mind's ear as a sea anchor of everything we have, of everything we are, and everything that is. Later that night, the child would be beaten by his father, and later that year, the child would be photographed by a stranger laughing with his parents at the Birmingham Zoo, and later that life, a soul would emerge, errant and obscure, and entombed inside a point of view that had by the twilight of my adolescence solidified into the first trace whispers of self-understanding, that some wall loomed over us, some vertiginous impasse had enclosed us into a hollow of non-belonging so specific that each attempt to describe it, to put it into words perhaps, and then to tame it, decayed only into new isolates of misunderstanding somewhere else. I had by then understanding myself as both an illegitimate child within the context of my family, an interloper in this country, an outsider into the world of other people whose life nobody had asked for, a life devoid of any trace of a lineage apart from that of bastard children. I could tell you about a childhood disfigured by my father's explosions. I could tell you about imploded doors, or imploding windows, or the implosion on my mother's face as she blundered after a purse my father had hurled onto the freeway the moment she picked up the purse and looked up from the freeway, and saw that our car was now speeding off without her. Or about the ballet of police lights that bathed our living room in Christmas red and Cherenkov blue as I watched my mother and father sputter panicked and conflicting narratives in fractured English to two police officers from the back of a police car. My thoughts no longer on the police lights, or the sirens, or the circumstances that led me to be handcuffed and assisted that night into the back of a police car, but on the calculus exam that I, in the best case scenario, would still have to sit for the next morning. But all I can really think about right now are those patterns that form out of the fissures of language, or those islets of misunderstanding. We swim in those islets, you know? Those isolate lakes. Over there is a sea, and out there, the stars. I used to think to myself all the time as I swam inside those lakes, wading through a constellation of impressions I had formed about the world of other people inside the starlit universe of my mind, and gazing up at those walls. To scale those walls was all I ever wanted to do as a child. But how? How does a child scale the segregation of human fates? What I realize now, and what I didn't have the words for then, is that human fates are segregated, quarantined, made impermeable to each other by virtue of the specificity of our memories, the specificity of our longings, the specificity of that life stretched out long and trembling in front of us, and our awareness that we alone would be the only ones to walk alongside ourselves into whatever hell or high water awaits us at the end of that glorious passage. Oh, sometimes we wither, and sometimes we make our way to each other, riding the high water mark of a torrent of words, drawing from that common well of language and cultural memory, the tropes assigned to us at birth, histories and lineages we had nothing to do with, artifacts of autobiography that can be isolated and reconstituted into evocative images, tumed with symbolic freight, the bedroom that was not a bedroom, but a crumple of bedsheets partitioned by curtains out of a living room, the bedsheets that were not in fact bedsheets, but 3 extra-large beach towels elongated over a bed that was not a bed at all, but 2 dirty sofa cushions strung together into a mattress on the living room floor. Oh, but what can I say? Tropes fail us all the time. All language that flattens, all language that simplifies, all language that lights the mind afire with the soft flame of flattery and the soothing solace of easy comforts, diffusing truth into isolate flecks of luminance that scatter into untruth somewhere else, fail us all the time, render us both visible and invisible to each other in the same stroke of the pen. The pure thing of being. How do you give that pure thing a name? How do you give the pure thing of anyone's experience of being alive to anyone else without mangling it in translation? Without trampling the paradoxes and ambiguities inherent in all complex inheritances? Without flattening its quilled skin into the intelligible strokes of an artist's brush? Of course you can't. Our lives are doomed to be swallowed by grand narratives and other people's interpretations, the way all small animals are defenseless against oceans. The American narrative is an ocean that churns on, and the lowly details of any particular human life are the smallest particles of all. Truth is never louder than promotional copy. In fact, every detail that I've given you so far can be complicated by some other detail that I haven't given you at all. And this is true for all things at all times. The only truth that can't be complicated any further is that profoundly neutral truth of everything that ever was, of which only the tiniest particles are made available to our eyes and ears because our lives are small and our senses finite, and for no other reason than an evolutionary one, to imbue us with emotion. This is how I spent all of my 20s, tumbling from emotion to emotion. Some truth about the world would tumble me into the deepest despair, while some other truth would rollick me all the way up to the top of the universe. To contemplate that final truth of everything that ever was can imbue us with a certain emotion too, but sadness or anger or joy seems to have nothing to do with it. That our emotions can be profoundly useful to our continued survival diverts us from the larger truth that they're almost invariably not. I want to put it in the record now that I spent 2 New Year's Eves in a row, back to back, 2014 and 2015, physically running after 2 different men who wouldn't take me back. In 2014, Drew and I were in a crowded nightclub, and in 2015, Bill and I were in the deserted parking garage of a high-rise apartment building where a friend of ours was throwing a party. Bro, can you just leave me the fuck alone? I can still remember Bill's voice echoing into the concrete. My 20s were a disordered time. In the throes of every emotion, we have only the weight of our instincts to go by, and instinct is not a sturdy home. I sometimes think the most insidious consequence American pop culture has had on America is that it misteaches us human behavior. In our movies and in our platitudes alike, human reactions unfold with narrative clarity. Our responses are unconcealed, our motivations easy to follow. In fact, every human being not trapped in a film strip is a collation of aftermaths. And most of our platitudes are in fact promotional copy. Once you start seeing the way pure truths get trampled, you'll start seeing it everywhere. It can be quite hypnotizing, really. The most vilified among us can inflate into creatures of stirring sympathy, while the most celebrated among us deflate into ingenious bummers. Sometimes I look at the successes I've had and wonder if I'm just an ingenious bummer too. I almost certainly am. The way modern men can manipulate other people's access to the pure thing of who we are is the stuff of legend. We've come a long way since the horse skins and plumages our ancestors wore. Reputation, Rhett Butler is said to have told Scarlett O'Hara, is something that people with courage can do without. If only it were that easy. In fact, what we can all intuit with non-negligible unease is that our reputations assail upon the meaning of our lives. Were you, the reader, the only conscious being in the universe, then your life would indeed mean whatever you say it means. The intrusion of a second person, let alone the intrusion of 7 billion others, snatches your life from your jealous, ever-tightening fingers and detaches it into a legacy. The fact that Pol Pot existed at all will for the rest of human history mean only one very specific and particular thing, no matter how badly he might have preferred to believe otherwise. For many of us, we discharge these uneasy suspicions into the love our families have for us, and we reward their love with our love. Some of us, truculent about safeguarding from others and preserving for ourselves the pure thing of our beings, run off into the woods. Others of us, hungry for the love that the humble pockets of the universe never gave us, run off to Hollywood. What all our public figures have in common, they have all, consciously or unconsciously, mastered the secular religion. We make it harder for each other to be alive all the time. Inside all our scrambled and finally very human efforts to imbue our lives with meaning, we've gotten the wires crossed, forgetting that the whole entire point of it all is that 7 billion other people exist too. This is how I always try to de-emotionalize myself from a childhood and adolescence that was nothing if not emotionally charged. Everything that exists is natural. Everything that exists is understandable. Error as much as truth. Ugliness as much as beauty. Sometimes I can even hypnotize myself with these pretty words into believing that this is the sort of man I've grown into. The more troubled you are, the more I want to come closer to you, bring you into the human fold. In fact, this is the sort of man I've grown into. The more troubled you are, the more likely I am to stay as far as I can the fuck away from you. What finally unsettles me is the very concept of human differentiation itself. I catch myself doing it all the time. Oh wow, he's so calm, so laid back, not at all an attention seeker like I am. Or else, she's so strange, so interesting to talk to. There's so much to look up to here. These thoughts unsettle me, move me away from the equanimity of remembering the neutrality of the human essence, the pure thing of a being that is the 10 billionth replication of something distant and ancient, while everything else, our personal attributes, our fears and loathings, our temperaments and dispositions and tastes and humor, is just window dressing, the unremarkable consequence of what our particular genetics/environment have imprinted onto us. To admire any single instantiation of that neutral and ancient human essence is a vulgar habit of mine that irks me to no end. What's so wonderful about all of the people I admire, and some of them are so cool I can't even tell you, surely should bleed into what's so wonderful about the innocence from which we all spawned. The mitochondrial Eve surely should be the pride of our species. And what's not so wonderful about, well, let's just say, there's no distance between ordinariness and barbarity that a perception of yourself as a victim cannot cross. surely is just a stain on that initial human essence, reproduced and copied into all of us, and suppressed or else obscured by stronger qualities in all of the people who I only imagine to be absent those bad features. What you love about Human X is the pride of every human being that you meet, and what embarrasses us about Human Y is the embarrassment of every member of our species. We're all just culminations, dust specks in the light beam of the grander scheme of things. This book is called The Pure Products of America because for a long time now, I've nurtured a conviction that the disorders that descend across this country today are the products of opaque inheritances, some quite talked about, but some less altogether known. We are all the fruits of seeds already sown. Troubled people with troubled motivations and troubled convictions have produced troubling consequences for the world. And what we all seem to have in common is that our troubles can be traced back to some narcissistic discharge, some deficit of epistemic humility, some variation forgetting that 7 billion other people exist too. To trace these lineages back one step further would be to come across the world's most stifling and voluptuous garden, intoxicating for its moral ambiguity. Mass media and pop culture ionize the sky. It is the sun and air we breathe, with some of the plants that build shelters. The platitudes and habits passed down from parent to child are the soil each seed grows in, often well-meaning, but the sun is strong. And there's also the matter of each seedling's built-in resistance to sainthood. All but a scattered few of us will consume the products of people trapped in slave-like conditions on the other side of the world. To look without jumping to conclusions. To judge our moral lesser-thans with only the aim of incentivizing future good deliberations and preventing future harms. And to pass at last from being the main character of our lives to being the supporting character of 7 billion other lives, because our lives are lived for other people. This is the final passage that I myself have yet to cross. For now, the only love I really have is tribal love, familial love, love for my favorite people in the world, and love only in the abstract for my countrymen, let alone for my speciesmen, let alone for the animals I eat. For now, I still write to you from Landlock. Over there is the sea, and out there, the stars. It's a pretty little image, isn't it? But it isn't true. All we have is inside here, inside these misunderstandings, inside these walls, inside our scrambled and finally very human efforts to forge some meaning out of our lives inside the everything that ever was of the universe. Because the years are long and every minute was a saga unto itself. To the people I've loved in this life, the deepest peace derives from the fact that you are and were and will continue to be. The fact of your existence has given me a little subdivision within human achievement to love and call home, and I don't even have to force it. The comfort is in the knowledge you exist. And if this book can communicate love, if these pages can offer the reader that very quiet witness of bondage and affection we have for certain things in this life we did nothing to deserve, but that life, over the course of billions and billions of years, saw fit to greatness anyway, well, I'll stay inside that upside for as long as I can.